Before we get started, one important thing is we will not have class next week. I'm going to be away on a retreat. So our next class after today will be on March 3rd in 2 weeks. And we can all sing happy birthday to my father that day. So.
Oh, okay. Can I ask you one more thing before we?
Yeah.
Linda just texted me. She'd like to jump in later when she comes back from her appointment. I sent her the numbers to type in. So will she just be let in?
She should just come right in. Okay. Yeah, there's no waiting room here for this meeting. So yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I won't be here on the 3rd. I won't be here on the 3rd.
Okay.
So early birthday wishes to you, Joe.
All right. Well, we're going to be working on chapter 9, Home Again. This is the longest chapter we've seen, so we'll see how far we get in it today. Before we jump into that, does anyone have any shalom moments to share today?
I guess a shalom moment for me was when I called and talked to the social worker at Graysdale for my mother and my mother-in-law, and John and I are going today to be allowed into their room to have what's called a compassionate visit.
Oh, wow.
So that's the first time, that we've done that. So we've done the other visits in a, in a specific room setting, but they're allowing us to go in to see them today. So.
Great.
Oh, great.
Good. Anything else? Okay. Well, let's pray then. Let us pray. Oh God, we thank you for coming into our lives in so many ways. We thank you for being with us through the good times and through the difficult times. As we study your word today and hear the stories of your people as they had returned home, we pray that you move us with compassion and with faith and with wisdom to see where you're calling to us today. Pray all this through Christ. Amen. Okay. So we're going to be starting about halfway through page 32. And you recall what we've seen so far in this chapter is the Israelites returned from exile, and we've seen that there was some conflict going on among some of the Israelites when they returned. There were leaders who were very xenophobic and tried to kick out any foreigners. And a small remnant there felt that they were being called by God to speak out against this, and they started to tell stories about the way Israel was called to treat outsiders. Stories like the story of Ruth and Moab, and stories like the tale of Jonah. So we've seen that going on, and now we're going to see basically what leads up to the Judea that we see in the New Testament. So we're kind of getting we're kind of between the testaments at this point, seeing what got them to that place. So the order of people on my screen is Karen, June, Georgia, Joe, Brenda, and Kim. So Karen, could you start with or starts the post-exilic community?
The post-exilic community lived in relative independence under Persian rule. Great change came when the Macedonians, often called the Greek Empire, defeated the Persians. The Persians had defeated the Babylonians, who had defeated the Assyrians. Big deal empires come and go. Now Greek-thinking people ruled the land. Things went fairly well until a ruler who called himself Antiochus, the manifestation of God, came along. He brutally persecuted the partner people in order to force them to adopt Greek religion. He also wanted them to embrace Greek culture. His soldiers and secret police harassed, tortured, and murdered many who chose to remain faithful to the God of Israel. Some of the people forsook Yahweh in order to live in comfort and security. Those who refused to yield to Antiochus suffered beyond description. They would always remember these days as the time of the great persecution.
Okay. And you can see the little soldiers there saying, "We will wipe Yahweh worship off the face of the earth." And they certainly gave it their best shot. So this religion that they're talking about isn't necessarily the belief in the Greek gods like Zeus and Hera and Athena that many of us learned about in school. It was kind of a melting pot of a lot of different religions, and it was kind of the expectation of the Greeks. This was the sophisticated way to be religious, and you don't just worship your own God. You recognize all of these gods as being real and being part of this. And of course, a lot of that was having to do with their leaders. Antiochus was not the first leader to claim that he was a god. That was something we saw, that the pharaohs certainly proclaimed as well back in Egypt. So how do you think worship of Yahweh, as we've seen it so far in this book, how would that fit in with this model of religion, as there's a whole bunch of different gods and you should respect and worship them all? How do you think that would fit in?
Not good. I mean, it was directly opposite of, what they were. I mean, they were always talking about the one true, Yahweh.
Yeah.
And there was no other.
And one thing that's distinctive of Yahweh worship, as we've seen, is the idea of a covenant, that that there was a covenant made between Yahweh and the people. And so what does being in a covenant say when confronted with other ways of worship like this?
But were they choosing to remain faithful to God of Israel?
That was the choice they had. Yeah. And some did and some didn't, which I think we often see in times of persecution. Whenever a religious minority is persecuted, I think some of them, for the sake of their own lives, will say, well, fine, I'll worship the way you want me to, and some will not, and will take the consequences.
And sometimes they'll go along with the leader, as in Germany, many people went along with Hitler, even though they really passively went along with him in the small villages and so on. They didn't know the atrocities, but they went along with him. Maybe they did know some of it, but it's amazing how a strong leader can really influence people, and they're afraid, if they don't.
Yeah.
Even in today's world, I'm sure it's happening.
Can you imagine any circumstances that would tempt you to abandon your faith?
I guess if somebody threatened people that I love, my kids or my husband, not that I would want to, but I could see, I often think of that, that, well, we feel like we have reasonable faith or somewhat strong in our faith, but I don't know if I could, watch my loved ones die or be killed. And I guess, you don't know what decision you would make if you were in that position. I'd like to think that I wouldn't succumb to that, but I'd also wouldn't want to watch my loved ones be killed.
So you'd definitely be tempted in that case.
I definitely would be tempted.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know what I would do in that situation.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us know the answer to that until we're faced with it. And hopefully we're never faced with it. But
Right.
mean, I've
Well-
often said that we, situations that I have seen people faced with is, when someone they love dies, especially if it's someone young. I've seen some people's faith, grow stronger through it, even through the suffering. And I've seen some people lose their faith entirely. I think, so in my experience as a pastor, I think that's one time when people's faith is, tempted to be abandoned is when someone dies too young. I think that really shakes people in a big way. I'm sorry, Karen, I was talking over you.
I think it can go both ways. I think, as you said, that situation can make people get really stronger in their faith.
Mhm.
They can renounce and denounce and whatever publicly just to get through the torture, but no one can take it away from your heart. Nobody can take away
It's true.
your faith, and nobody, that's what's yours, and that'll never end. So, but I've met one or two people who lost their faith because of what situation happened to them.
Yeah.
And but usually, and in my case, when things happen, they get stronger.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't really find out what we truly put our faith in until the chips are down. It's easy to claim, and I don't mean that you're deceiving other people, but it's easy to deceive ourselves, and into saying, I believe in God and I believe in whatever I say. But then when something very difficult happens, you kind of find out, where is your faith? Some of us find out it is what we thought, and some of us find out it's something else. So obviously this was not an easy time. So let's move on to page 33. Then we'll read the first paragraph there.
The ruthless Antioch not only persecuted the faithful, he also utterly desecrated the little temple they built when they returned from Babylon. The faithful responded by telling stories to encourage each other to remain true to Yahweh. Stories of heroes like Daniel, who refused to compromise even when he was thrown into a den of lions. They also told stories about strange beasts and dragons and cosmic battles, tales which announced in symbolic language and dramatic fashion that Antioch will fall and Yahweh will prevail. Through these wonderful stories, the partner people encouraged faith and resistance in ways Antioch and his secret police would never understand.
Okay, thank you. So, and the picture on the right there is obviously a picture of Daniel in the lion's den. The leader guide that I have tells me that this picture of Daniel there is the author's self-portrait, that he the author here is his name's Daniel as well, and apparently he drew himself there. I guess
Cameo appearance. That's funny.
I mean, I don't know. But what do you remember learning about the story of Daniel in the lion's den? That's another one that I think we learned in Sunday school. What do you remember about that?
That Daniel prayed a lot while he was in the lion's den,
Mhm.
and that angel came and kept the mouths of the lion from eating him.
Do you remember what happened at the end of it? How the king responded?
Yeah, I think the king ended up praying to Daniel's God because he saw that Daniel's God was powerful.
Yeah, I think it's even in the little illustration here, you see the guy with the crown on saying Daniel's God is the living God, and that was the response in the story. So what do you think the lion's den was? What was a lion's den?
Where they eat
Okay.
whatever, they have bones all around and they take their kill.
And how did this lion's den function in the life of the empire there?
It was punishment and ultimate death when you didn't agree with what the king said.
Yeah, this was they didn't have guillotines or firing squads or anything like that. They had the lion's den. If you were going to be executed, that's how we did it. Which reminds me a little bit of the story of of how the Romans would have gladiators go into the ring against lions. And I'm not sure if in this case they were given swords to try and fight, but the expectation was you're not going to win this. The lions are going to get you. So a lion's den is kind of a metaphorically, it's being in a situation that's not of your own doing, that seems to have no way out, and that's just going to lead to death. Can you think of anybody or any groups of people who we could say are in something of a lion's den today?
Well, they're not being eaten, but they're suffering. The refugees are suffering in these camps. The ones from Afghanistan and the island of Lesbos is just thousands of people who it doesn't accommodate that many people, and they're all just like suffering there, or just suffering on the way to get there on the boat. So that's where I see some of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, and probably, for many of them, they don't see what the hope is at the end. It looks like this is, I think that's a good example. I just reread the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, and a good part of that book, he describes his experience in the camps. I think that was most certainly a lion's den, to be in Auschwitz or any of the camps during the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
So what would telling the story of Daniel do for the people? Again, this is another story that would have taken place back during the Babylonian exile. This is not something that was taking place right then, but this is the story they chose to tell, to write down and tell and share. Why do you think that this story became important to them at this point?
It would encourage them to hang in there.
Courage to hang in there. Yeah, one thing I didn't mention is that the reason Daniel got thrown in there, and maybe we all remember that, but the reason Daniel got thrown in there is because he refused to worship the gods he was told to worship. So he was in something of a similar situation to what the people were really experiencing. And he got through it through God's action, which I think was intended to give the people hope and courage. Okay. Well, let's read the next paragraph.
Under the leadership of the Maccabean brothers, those who chose the way of armed resistance ran Antiochus and his big deal cohorts out of the country. God's partner people sang and danced and feasted when they rededicated their little temple as a place to worship Yahweh and Yahweh alone. To this day, the great Maccabean liberation is celebrated in the festival of Hanukkah.
Okay. And the references here, the biblical references here are to First Maccabees and Second Maccabees, which are books that are included in Roman Catholic versions of the Bible. They're not included in Protestant versions of the Bible, unless your Bible also has something called the Apocrypha in it, which are books that were written basically between the Testaments, that some people have considered scripture and some have not. A lot of Protestant Bibles include them anyway, just because they're important stories, even if we don't consider them to be on the same level as scripture. So they chose, at least a group of people here, led by the Maccabees, chose to engage in violence against the Macedonian Empire. Do you think there's times when violence is the right answer? And I'm not expecting a certain answer from you. What do you think?
Violence is such a strong word, but I guess when you're killing people, that's what you use. But I think that in any situation, when things get out of hand and there is danger going on that's going to be terrible, someone has to, or a couple of people have to come and take charge. And it may be before that, everything was lovely and democratic, but then there's a point where someone needs to take charge to bring back some order, whether it's in an institution, a church, or whatever. I mean, sometimes there's disorder that needs to be, straightened out. And I don't mean violence. I mean, necessarily, I mean, somebody has to be tougher than they were. And then in some cases, I haven't really been one who's associated with war, but if there's an armed resistance, and I think you need to take charge, change things.
The history of Christianity has a long debate that's not settled over whether war is sometimes justified or not. There are some groups of Christians from the Anabaptist tradition and people like the Quakers who, whose faith tells them that there is never a justification for war. But there are other Christians, and Lutherans are historically among them, who say that, war is not a good thing. It's not something to rejoice about, but it is sometimes right. There are some times when war is the unfortunate thing that needs to be done. And that's, it's a very difficult question. So we see here kind of two different models of how to respond to what's going on here. You see the Daniel model of being faithful, just being faithful and trusting that God will provide through it. And you see the Maccabean model and from their standpoint, they interpreted they were being called by God to take up arms and do something about this. Which of these two models kind of fits more with your personality? Which do you align more with, Daniel or the Maccabees? And again, I don't mean to imply one is right and one is wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say.
I find that really hard to say because I've never really been in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So So it's kind of tough to make a judgment. It really
Okay.
is.
I mean, I think about what Kim said earlier, if anyone were to hurt family or loved ones that that you really cared about, how would you react? At that point, if somebody, came in at point blank with guns and put them to their head, I mean, what would you, how would you react? And I think in that case, I would tend to be violent.
Mhm.
Well, there's nothing better than, there negotiation and trying to communicate with someone, of course, would be the best way to go to bring peace. And even if you have an armed robber around, if you could possibly do that, but we try to negotiate and use diplomacy, and if all else fails, you have to go that route of violence.
Yeah, these are very tough questions. I think, one, I think recent historical event that brings up questions like this is the question of whether the United States should have dropped bombs on Japan or not. I think the argument for it is that that loss of life prevented a much bigger loss of life, which I think has some merit. On the other hand, it was a tremendous loss of civilian life. And I think these are tough questions, and even tough to interpret what God is calling you to through these things. I'm very glad that I've never felt called to be a military chaplain. I think that would be a really, I mean, I'm glad there are pastors called to do that, and I've known some, and they're great, but that would be really tough for me. So. All right, well, let's see what happened next. So the last paragraph on this page.
About a century of political independence followed the Maccabean victory. Now God's partner people had a chance to establish a society based on the covenant gift, a manna society for all. They had an opportunity to practice righteousness and mercy, to live as God's contrast society. Unfortunately, priests who stepped in to fill a leadership vacuum decided to become big deals. They established an Egypt-like society using their leadership positions to grab wealth and power. Corruption abounded. The big deal priest rulers exploited the poor. Priest families fought with each other for power. The society began to smell foul. The maggots returned, and God and all creation wept. Would the promise ever come true?
So here we go again. God brought them out of Egypt, and they blew it. God brought them back from Babylon, and they blew it. And now through the Maccabees, apparently God, released them from servitude under the Greeks, and they blew it again. Do you think power always leads to corruption?
If not always, darn close to it.
Mm-hmm. If you remember, a couple of weeks back, we saw something called the Shalom Triangle, that there were three things that had to be in balance, and they were righteousness, mercy, and worship. And what do you see might be out of balance in the culture of Israel as it's described in this last paragraph here?
Name the three again.
Righteousness, mercy, and worship.
Well, they did lots of worship. They had the temple, and they were doing okay with that. So it comes down to mercy or righteousness. And I think they were missing out on both of them because righteousness demanded justice for all people. And mercy meant, again, justice for all people. So I guess the mercy and righteousness are what's missing.
I mean, the priests that stepped in to be the leaders were the ones that, because of, them wanting to be the big deals and everything, were the ones that threw righteousness and mercy right out the window.
Power can be a good thing sometimes. I've met leaders who've taken over situation. They had a lot of power, but they used it for good. So I see power is not always negative. Depending how it's used.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to the next page, because this period of relative peace wasn't going to last that long, as it never did. So let's read this first paragraph on 34, and then we'll look at the picture above it.
While the ruler priests and their families competed for power, another big deal empire decided to take over the world. This time, the great world power was the Roman Empire, which was centered in the city of Rome. Because the priest leaders of the partner people were so corrupt and the society was so sick, the nation fell into Roman hands like rotten fruit dropping from a tree.
Oh, what an image. So this picture up top here, you can see this is it's marked as Zion, which means the hill on which Jerusalem is built. So this would be Jerusalem at this point. What do you see going on in this illustration? What's happening here?
Well, most of the figures that are standing at the top of the wall appear to be Roman.
I think so. Yeah. Yep.
But on the far right, where the caption is "We can work with them," I would think that those were the priests.
I agree. That's my interpretation of it. Yeah. So what are those Romans doing? What are they doing? What are they saying? How do they look?
They all look happy.
Yeah. They look very happy. Yes. What do you think they're happy about?
That they took over the world.
And they really did. Rome was one of the most effective empires for a time.
Right. They're happy about being Roman. Like it's like propaganda. Rome is good. Rome is benevolent. Rome is just everything. So they're happy about being Roman and want to convince everybody else they should be Roman, even if they have to do it by force.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what one of them is saying, Pax Romana, which is a Latin phrase that meant the peace of Rome. And it was something that the Romans talked about a lot. They brought peace to the world. And in a sense, they did. There were no wars going on, among places where Rome was in charge, because Rome put a stop to all of it. Rome was militarily unbeatable for hundreds of years. And so yeah, there was peace. Of course, what did that peace look like for other people? If you look elsewhere in the illustration.
They don't look happy. They look diminished, downtrodden.
They look diminished. I think you're right. They look like they look small. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And their heads are lowered.
Mm-hmm.
Well, from what I read, it's like rotten fruit dropping from a tree.
Yeah.
What is that? Now, the eagle up there is the symbol, Kim was saying, it's, the importance of the Roman Empire is shown on the shield there, but there's an SPQR or something.
I don't remember what that stands for. Does anybody remember? I know it's a Latin phrase that was the motto of Rome.
Okay, all
Does anybody
right.
remember that? From our
Semper something?
probably, yeah, I would guess the R is probably stands for Roma or something, but
Yeah.
that's kind of, he's basically holding the emblem of Rome there. And my guess is that he's probably the leader because he's got those laurels on his head that make him look like depictions of Julius Caesar. So
Oh, the R is probably for Rome, Roma.
probably, I would guess. Yeah. Yeah.
I just love to make a guess on those things, but yeah.
Okay, here's what it stands for. Senatatus Populesque Romanus, which translated means the Roman Senate and people.
Oh,
Freely the Senate and people of Rome.
Roman Senate.
So it's kind of their motto, I guess.
Which at this point in Roman history was pretty much propaganda too, because the Senate had basically been abolished by the emperor. So yeah. Rome was good at propaganda, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they had a piece that was established through propaganda, which included a lot of lies, and also through the power of force. I mean, one of the things that strikes you about the illustration is everybody's holding a weapon. Well, there's two spears, a shield, and then the guy with the propaganda. So it's kind of it's a peace forced among people, and there were no wars because they had militarily defeated everybody. They had a war to end all wars, so to speak. But then the peace was enforced not by sharing the wealth with other people, but by enforcing them to do what Rome wanted.
Yeah. So again, here we go again. I'm seeing in some of the way these people are looking here a sense of such despair, possibly not just because now they're under the Roman Empire, but that this keeps happening over and over and over again. They keep having corrupt leaders followed by being destroyed by or being taken over by another group, followed by more corrupt leaders taken over by another group. It just doesn't end. But this is a really fun class today, isn't it? All right, let's read through the rest of the page.
Under Roman rule, greed and injustice continued. The necessity to pay both the heavy Roman taxes and the temple tithe drove many common people into terrible debt. Rich families took advantage of this situation and seized the Nahala, the land inheritance of many common folk. They added house to house and field to field, and the plight of the people became one of living as tenant farmers and paying exorbitant rent, working as day laborers at near starvation wages, struggling under a crushing load of debt, facing imprisonment or slavery, begging for money to buy food for one's family.
Okay. Which of these things, if any, these 5 things, still remain a common experience for a lot of people today?
Number 3, struggling under a crushing load of debt.
Sure, a lot of people.
Well, number 2, working as day laborers, it's not quite accurate to describe today's situation, but there are a number of people who need to hold down 2 jobs just to have a basic standard of living.
Yeah.
Just to pay for housing and food, they're working an awful lot of hours just to make minimal wage. That's something pretty much like that.
Yep.
I think number 5, they might not be begging for money, but hunger for, just trying to feed their family.
There are areas in the country that have farm workers who are there just for a while and they have to find housing. They maybe are supplied some housing, but they have to pay part of their wages. And especially in the South, Florida, there's some sections of poverty. People are living in poverty and working very hard. A lot of Mexican people. And they're living as a number one, living as tenant farmers and paying exorbitant rent.
I'm reminded of the story of how a lot of coal mining towns worked.
Mhm.
And I guess the 19th century that, the company owned your house and you paid rent and you had to buy everything at the company store. And, I think it wasn't slavery, but I think there were some similarities between that and slavery.
I know that's how it was in Nazareth.
Was it?
With the cement companies and that. I mean, John's grandfather came over from Hungary and they lived in company housing, which it was a whole, it was a community. And talking with John's mother, from her growing up there, she said, we didn't have a lot, but we had each other. So, I mean, there was a strong sense of community, but you're right, everything was owned by the company.
And there was that song that said, 16 tons and deeper in debt, I owe my soul to the company store. I forget who sang that, but it was kind of an expression of what those days were like.
Deeper in debt.
Mhm.
When we lived in Minersville, we lived next door to a family that had this small little backyard. And they grew an exorbitant amount of produce in that little backyard. And then he'd share it with all his neighbors. I never understood what that was all about till some years later when I learned that in order to survive, many of the coal mining families would take that little plot of land in the back of their rented houses and grow as many vegetables as they could. And that had kind of just, that custom was handed down to this family, which no longer needed to do that to survive. But it was something that their ancestors had done in order to survive. They used every little piece of land they could find to grow food.
Mhm. Mhm. When I had worked for, when I first started to work, I worked for a certified public accountant, and we did a lot of payrolls for places in the area. And one of them was Shoemaker's Orchard in Mount Bethel. And in the fall, they would get the immigrant workers, and those guys, they had places for them to live, so they didn't need to, look for places to live. But they were paid, depending on the apple, 5 to 10 cents per apple when they picked the apples. That takes an awful lot of picking of apples to make any kind of decent wage.
And one thing that strikes me here is that the way the church tries to respond to things like this today is by helping, in some way, whether it's through advocating for a change in society or providing for people who don't have. But if you look here, the religious leaders were at this point caught up in all of it. I think partially because the religious leaders were also the political leaders. It was one and the same. And instead of saying that, well, because of the terrible taxes that we have to pay to Rome, we'll figure out another way to fund the temple. You have to still pay your temple tithe in addition to all this. And on then the next page talks a little bit about what these these priestly families kind of turned into. So let's go ahead to the top of 35. Are we back at the beginning again now, I guess?
Oh,
Yeah, I think we're back to you, Karen.
okay, sorry. The wealthy priestly landowners formed themselves into a party called the Sadducees. They collaborated with the Roman occupation in order to maintain their riches and power. Because of this alliance, the poor people were ground into the dust by both the brutal Roman rulers and the heartless rich of their own people.
Yeah. One of the ways empires often work, I think, and certainly one of the ways the Romans did it, was they didn't have to, send, Romans to be in charge of every province, of every colonized land. They could just use human nature against the people and just say, you know what, we'll find some people there who, in return for lots of money, will do our job for us. And that's unfortunately what the Sadducees, allowed to happen. That they kept their standard of living. They were able to still have all that they had before and all that they wanted. And in return, they just needed to do what Rome said. And it was from the Sadducees that some of the so-called kings of Judea came. The first of whom was King Herod the Great, who we know of from the Christmas story. And the Great certainly doesn't describe his personality. It describes the power he had, but he was a nasty piece of work. But he didn't care at all. He just wanted, as long as he had his power, and Rome was happy with him, he did their work. So let's read let's read the rest of the page.
Once
Me?
again,
Who? June.
June, I guess.
once again, the society of God's precious partner people look like Pharaoh's Egypt. God's dream of a contrast society, a people practicing justice and mercy, attracting the nations to the manna way, was shattered. The Creator wept and creation wept. Will shalom ever come to planet Earth? The covenant people whom God had rescued from Egypt were now in deep crisis. How did they respond to the terrible oppression? Some of the most desperate followed apostolic prophets who announced the end of the world. Others followed self-appointed messiahs who claimed to be God's chosen deliverers. Almost everyone longed for Yahweh's true Messiah who would save the nation.
Okay. So if we look at this picture here, boy, this looks familiar, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the same picture we had in Egypt. And just as it was there, it was the priesthood and the military. It was the Egyptian priesthood and the Egyptian military. Here it's the Roman military and the Jewish priesthood. It's their own people who are kind of lording it over them here. And and these groups here in each level are very similar to the groups who were in Egypt. And they're saying this is the way it is and the way it will always be. And certainly it was easy to believe that. So this is described here as a crisis, that this crisis was that Rome had come in, and that any hope of a shalom society seemed to be dashed forever. What are some of the crises that we've faced in our lifetimes?
Losing a job.
A personal crisis there, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Vietnam War.
Absolutely. think the past 2 years have been a crisis. I think the pandemic has been a crisis. And what do people do during crises? What are some of the things people do during crises?
I think the people definitely try to pull together more when there's a crisis, when there's a disaster, or not everyone, but I think sometimes people are more willing to help others when there's an obvious crisis. And I guess maybe on the flip side, some people kind of hunker down and only worry about themselves and their closest loved ones. So I don't know. It's kind of, you could see both things happening, actually.
Mhm.
I mean, here it looks like when this crisis happened that, there were others out there that were like scheming, looking to take advantage of, people who just didn't know who to believe or what to believe. And then they started their own prophesying and trying to, you need to follow me. I'm the one that has the way. So they're playing on, people who really are distraught and just looking for some word to follow.
Do you think that still happens today?
Yes, very much so.
Hmm.
I think this
Absolutely.
causes, I think this pandemic has caused a lot of anxiety and helplessness and all kinds of mental health issues. Some bad, some worse than others. And then people are hungering for some sort of solution to their being so anxious, and they're looking for help, solution, and they'll grab it, anything that sounds good to them. It may not be rational necessarily. It's going to meet their emotional needs.
Just want to say hello to Linda. Glad you could join us.
Hello.
Hey, good morning, Linda.
We're on the bottom of page 35 right now. We're talking about the last paragraph there in the picture we see at the bottom.
Okay.
So
Thank
yeah,
you.
so people certainly, were looking for messiahs, and there was no shortage of people claiming to be the Messiah either. What made Jesus unique was not that he claimed to be the Messiah. What made him unique is that he actually was. But that wouldn't have surprised anybody.
And yet
There's a
he
line. What?
downplayed that claim.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
He kept saying to people, now look, let's not make too big a deal of this,
Yeah.
because he was gathering a group of people who would continue his work. And that's one of the key differences, I think, in Jesus and a lot of other would-be messiahs, that there are some people think, I've got the answer. Jesus says, well, I might have some answers, but their answers have to emerge also from the people who I'm calling to minister with me. I think too often we assume that one person alone has to have all the answers to solve our problems, and that's not how it works. People need to work together. Problems aren't solved by a single person. They can only be solved by people working together.
I think today, a lot we sometimes slip into looking to certain politicians to be that answer. I think there were people who expected Barack Obama to be that, and I think there are people who expected Donald Trump to be that. And I think we found that in both cases they were not, and nor could they have been even. As the president, it doesn't have the ability to be the Messiah that I think sometimes in desperation we look to. And maybe that's true in every generation. That people look to their leaders to do that. I've certainly seen it recently. The other thing that a lot of people claimed was that the end of the world was coming. Do you see people saying that today?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
There's some.
I think there have been people claiming the end of the world is coming for probably since language started. And I think that there's, one thing that tends to be a common thread through it is that there are people who are experiencing desperation. People who feel that things are so desperate that that's the only answer there could be is for this to end and start all over again.
And I think it's a way people get out of dealing with reality. A lot of people deny the reality of climate change by saying, well, God would never allow the world to destroy itself, and therefore we don't have to do anything because God will step in here and save us. Well, that's not how God works. We need to be the ones who work at the problems and not just expect God to work these magic tricks that I think some people think are going to happen.
Yeah. But I think someone said that it's not rational. Was that you, Karen, who said that? And I think that's where a lot of this comes from is people who are experiencing life in a way that is so desperate that that they're not able to think rationally, or yeah, they're just not able. I mean, our brains don't allow us to think rationally if we're under a certain level of stress. It actually shuts down that part of our brain. And that was the experience a lot of people were having at this time, and the experience people still have today. I can be a lot more compassionate towards people when I remember that, not everything everyone does is from a rational place. So let's look up on page 36. We'll move on a little further.
Many people joined bandit groups, which swept down from their hiding places to rob and kill. Their targets were mainly the wealthy Jews who collaborated with the Romans. They saw their skirmishes with these big deals and with the Roman soldiers as preparation for the big battle soon to come. In this battle, the Messiah, the promised Davidic king, would lead the people to a glorious victory over Rome. Together, they would utterly destroy the Romans and all the enemies of God. Then the Messiah would establish what everyone dreamed about, an everlasting kingdom of justice and peace.
Okay. So you see a picture here of one of these bandits, and one of the groups of them was called the Zealots, who you might have heard of. At least one of Jesus' apostles is said to have been a zealot. We don't know any details about that, except that his name is Simon the Zealot. But anyway, you see him standing there saying, God will fight with us. And just use your imagination. And what do you think's going on in the heads of the three people standing next to him? What might be? What might they be thinking or saying at this point?
They're a little worried. One guy looks a little worried anyway.
Okay.
Looks a little skeptical, or like, oh no, is this another problem here?
So he's not sure if this is the right thing or not. Okay.
They look like they might be a lower class based on, it looks like they have clothing on that might be torn or worn.
That's an interesting insight there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was a way that that some people interpreted waiting for the Messiah. There was among some groups, there was a feeling, an interpretation of Scripture that said that yes, God's Messiah is going to come, but we need to prepare the way for this Messiah. And the way we prepare the way is by taking out the trash, is by banding together in armed groups, and basically they were guerrilla groups. And you notice that their targets were mostly not the Romans, but actually the wealthy Jews who were collaborating with them. Why do you think they would have chosen those as their targets instead of the Romans themselves?
Because the Romans had spears.
Could be. It could be that simple. Is the chances of success were greater for that reason. Why else? Yeah. All right.
Said power.
They wanted to wipe out any opposition. They thought maybe those wealthy Jews would not join them and not help them out when things changed. They wanted to get rid of them before that happened. Probably, got rid of them.
And whom do you think you'd be more angry at? The empire who came in and took over, or your fellow countrymen who joined up with that empire?
Probably the fellow countrymen.
I would think there'd be a sense of betrayal.
Right.
I would think that probably in these bandits' minds, the Sadducees were traitors to their people. So that could be a partial reason as well, that they feel that they were, that as bad as the Romans were, it was the Jews who collaborated with them were worse. Could be what was going on there. But they really believed, these were people who were doing what they really thought was the right thing to do, that by doing this, it would bring the Messiah, it would bring peace, that this violence was a necessary precursor to peace. And we talked, we talked a little while ago about what it would take for us to resort to turn to violence, and we came up with some ways we could understand how that would happen. All right, let's finish the page then.
Are we at me?
I think so.
Yahweh wept because the beloved partner people, called by God to bless all nations, was instead longing for war and preparing for war. Yahweh beheld a people chosen to give life to the world, now planning to kill. They were like old Jonah longing for the destruction of Nineveh. The sorrow of God filled the entire universe. Besides pushing thousands of families into poverty and creating a war mentality, the Roman occupation introduced attractive Greek and Roman culture, which threatened the partner people's Jewish way of life. Afraid they would lose their identity, the people turned inward. They embraced the purity laws in their scripture as the absolute norm for living as the true people of God.
But Mom, Dad, don't you understand that one must adopt Roman ways to get any place in this world?
Yeah.
So when have you felt pressured to change yourself in order to fit in?
I think when I was in high school, when I was younger, but as I get older, that doesn't bother me. That kind of, I am who I am, and
Yeah.
So that. But when you're younger, I think it happens more so. Yeah,
Sure.
at least in my case.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
When you think about kind of cultural changes and fads and things that come and go, would you classify yourself more as an eager adopter of new cultural changes, or more of a skeptical separatist? Are you somebody who kind of goes along with new things, or do you tend to not?
Well, the joke in our house is that if I wasn't married and my wife bought me new shirts, I'd still be wearing the shirts I had in high school. I guess I try to stick with the old ways.
Okay.
I never see much of a need for new clothes.
See, I always thought that was less though about your sense of style and more that you just wouldn't notice that they had become rags.
Well, that's true too. I mean, whatever it is, that doesn't matter.
Yes. That's your identity, your true identity
My true identity.
is old t-shirts.
Old t-shirts.
I think I like to learn about technology, and I have friends that have no interest in it at all.
Yeah.
I just like to learn new things. And so I'm open to that.
I'm glad you brought up technology because that's a way in which I'm definitely, I try to keep up with the changes and fads and stuff, not necessarily in other ways, but with technology. I love having the latest gadgets and things.
Yeah. Me too.
Mhm.
And I love learning something new. My grandkids can teach me.
Yeah.
Or whoever.
Mhm. Mhm.
And sometimes it's unclear whether these things are, are good or bad. Where there's some good things about Greco-Roman culture, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot that culture could offer, but there's a downside to to shifting everything over to that, and I think people tended to go all the way one way or the other. They either did what this I guess teenager's doing in the picture, putting laurel leaves on his head and saying I'm a Roman now, and his parents, who look ancient to me there, they look more like his great grandparents, frankly, but that's they're sticking with the old ways, and that was one way the people responded to that was to say, we need to hold on to who we are, to our identity, and that means following some very, very strict rules. And we're going to stop at the end of this page, but where that's going to lead to, as we'll see next time, is the rise of a group called the Pharisees, who were very much connected to following all of the ritual and purity rules, because they felt that was crucial to maintaining their identity as who they were, which is one way of responding to the crisis they have. So this has not been a very optimistic or fun class, but it's kind of, I think it's where we needed to go to get to where we're going next. So so we'll start on page 37 next time. We'll finish up chapter 9, and then we'll be heading into the story of Jesus. So any last thoughts, questions, reflections before we close? Hey, Linda, I did announce to the others that we're not going to have class next week, so we'll meet again in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you.
So thank you all very much. Have a good day, and enjoy the beautiful weather today.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.